The whip cracked like breaking bone. Ona didn't scream. She curled tighter around the blind pup in her arms as the silver-threaded leather tore another strip from her back. Blood soaked through her gray tunic. The courtyard of Ironspire watched in silence. 200 wolves holding their breath while an Omega refused to let go of a curse. "Drop it," Alpha King Balthazar Grimm growled, raising the wormtail for strike number 11, "or I'll make sure you never walk again." Una looked up through tangled, mud-streaked hair. Her voice came out as a rasp. "Then break my legs. I'm not giving him up." Before we go further, have you ever been told you were protecting the wrong thing? That your compassion was stupidity? Drop a wolf in the comments if you've ever chosen loyalty over safety. This story is for you. The Northern Reach didn't do mercy. The iron-gray skies bled sleet that turned the stone courtyard into a freezing soup of mud and bone meal. Balthazar stood like a monument, 6'7", leather tunic stiff with salt from old battles, jaw carved from granite. In his world, weakness wasn't just a flaw, it was a disease, and the trembling white pup in Una's arms was patient zero. "Let me explain this to you slowly, Omega," Balthazar said, his voice a rumble that vibrated in every chest. "The law of the flawless fang is absolute. We do not feed mouths that cannot hunt. We do not waste resources on eyes that cannot see the enemy." Una's grip tightened on the pup. His name was Silas, 3 months old, snow-white fur, and eyes that were milky, clouded, useless. "He's a baby," she whispered. "He's a void bringer," Balthazar roared, spit flying. The pack flinched. "You see those eyes? That's not blindness, that's a curse. The gods marked him defective. If we let him live, the rot spreads to the rest of us." Una's knees sank deeper into the frozen mud. Her arms shook, not from fear, but from the effort of holding Silas while her shredded back screamed in agony. "He hasn't even seen the sun," she said, looking straight into Balthazar's cold amber eyes. "How can you judge a life that hasn't had a chance to live?" A woman from the crowd, Balthazar's mate, Celine, stepped forward. Her voice was silk over steel. "Una, you were born Omega. That means your bloodline already failed. Why are you clinging to another failure? Let the pup go to the pit. It's a mercy." "Mercy," Una repeated, bitter laughter bubbling in her throat. "You call throwing a blind child into a hole to starve mercy?" Balthazar's patience snapped. "Enough." He stepped forward, towering over her, the wormtail uncoiled in his hand like a living thing. The whip was no ordinary weapon. It was braided from silver-threaded sinew, designed to burn as it cut. "You have one more chance, Una Valerius. Hand over the pup. Walk away. I'll let you keep your position in the kitchens. Or," he leaned down, his breath reeking of iron and rage, "or you take his punishment for him." The pack held its breath. Una looked down at Silas. The tiny pup's chest rose and fell. He let out a soft huff, a sound of trust. He didn't understand what was happening. He only knew the scent of lavender and hearth smoke. He only knew Una. She looked back up at Balthazar. "Let the steel fall." The first strike was fire. The second was agony. By the 10th, her vision blurred, but she never let go. She curled her body into a shield, every muscle screaming as the whip carved into her shoulders, her ribs, her spine. Silas whimpered once, just once, and Una whispered through her gritted teeth, "It's okay, baby, it's okay." Balthazar raised the whip again and hesitated. For the first time in 30 years of rule, he felt something he couldn't name. It wasn't pity, it was fear. Not of her strength, of her silence. "Throw them in the weeping cells," Balthazar spat, turning his back. His voice echoed across the frozen courtyard. If the gods want the pup to live, they'll feed him. If not, the Omega dies holding a corpse. Two guards grabbed Una by the arms and dragged her toward the stone archway that led beneath the fortress. Silas stayed clutched to her chest, his milky eyes staring at nothing. The pack dispersed in silence, but in that silence, a seed was planted, a question no one dared to ask out loud. What if the Omega knows something the king doesn't? The courtyard had been silent before, but now it was the silence of a held breath, the kind that burns in the lungs until you're dizzy with it. Una knelt in the mud, Silas pressed against her chest. The pup's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. She could feel his warmth seeping through her tattered tunic, a small furnace of life that kept her from collapsing. Balthazar circled her like a predator sizing up wounded prey. The wormtail dragged through the mud behind him, leaving a serpentine trail. He stopped directly in front of her. "Last chance, Omega." His voice was quieter now, which somehow made it worse. "Give me the pup. Walk away. You can still have a life here." Una looked up at him. Blood dripped from her split lip into the mud. What kind of life is built on abandoning children? "The kind that survives," Balthazar said. "Then I don't want it." The whip sang through the air. Strike 12 landed across her shoulder blades. The silver threads in the leather didn't just cut, they burned like acid, searing through skin and muscle. Una's body jerked forward, but her arms stayed locked around Silas. She bit down on her tongue so hard she tasted copper. No scream, not one. In the watching crowd, a young warrior named Davin looked away. His mate, Kira, grabbed his hand. "Don't," she whispered. "You can't help her." "She's going to die," Davin said through clenched teeth. "We're all going to die if we go against the Alpha." Strike 13, 14, 15. Una's world narrowed to three things: the burning agony in her back, the warmth of Silas against her chest, and the sound of her own breathing, ragged, desperate, but steady. Each breath was a choice. Each exhale was defiance. Balthazar's arm was starting to tire, but he couldn't stop now, not in front of the pack, not when an Omega was making him look weak. "You think this is loyalty?" he roared, bringing the whip down again. "This is stupidity. The pup can't even see you. He doesn't know you're protecting him." Una's voice came out as a rasp, barely audible. "He knows." And Silas did know. His milky eyes couldn't see the whip or the blood or the hatred on Balthazar's face, but he could feel Una's heartbeat against his small body. He could smell her scent, lavender and smoke, even beneath the copper tang of blood. And somewhere deep in his tiny, forming mind, he understood that this person was choosing pain so he wouldn't have to feel it. Strike 20, 25, 30. Balthazar's breathing was labored now. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cold. His arms shook with each swing, not from exhaustion, but from something else, something he refused to name, because Una still hadn't screamed. She hadn't begged. She hadn't even cried. In the crowd, old Marin, the pack's eldest healer, watched with narrowed eyes. She'd seen many things in her 83 years. She'd seen warriors break under torture. She'd seen mothers abandon children to save themselves. She'd seen strength measured in fangs and muscle and dominance. But she'd never seen this. This was a different kind of strength, the kind that didn't roar, the kind that didn't need to prove itself. It simply existed, quiet and immovable as stone. Balthazar raised the whip for strike 35, and his hand trembled, not from fatigue, from fear. Because if an Omega could endure this without breaking, what did that say about his power? What did it say about the law of the flawless fang if the weak one was stronger than the king? He lowered the whip. "Enough." His voice cracked on the word. He turned to his guards, unable to look at Una's ruined back. Take them to the weeping cells. If the gods want them to live, they'll provide. If not, he forced steel back into his voice. Let them rot together in the dark. The guards moved forward hesitantly. They'd expected to find Una unconscious or dead. Instead, she was still kneeling, still breathing, still holding the pup. When they grabbed her arms, she finally made a sound, a soft grunt as her shredded muscles protested. But she didn't fight. She let them haul her to her feet, and she kept one arm wrapped around Silas even as they bound her wrists. As they dragged her toward the stone archway, Silas let out a single sharp whine. Una pressed her cheek against his head. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you." The pack watched them disappear into the darkness beneath Ironspire. When they were gone, no one spoke, no one moved. They stood in the frozen courtyard, staring at the blood-soaked mud where Una had knelt. Balthazar walked away without a word, the wormtail coiled in his fist. But in his chambers that night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Una's face, not twisted in pain, but calm, resolved, certain. For the first time in 30 years, Balthazar Grimm felt small. The darkness beneath Ironspire wasn't just absence of light. It was a presence, a weight that pressed against the eyes, the lungs, the mind. The weeping cells earned their name from the constant drip, drip, drip of water seeping through the stone ceiling, each drop marking time with maddening precision. Una lay on the wet stone floor, Silas tucked against her stomach. Her back was a landscape of agony. Each breath pulled at torn skin. Each movement sent fire racing down her spine. The guards had thrown them into the cell and left without a word. No food, no water, no light. Just darkness and the endless dripping. "It's okay," Una whispered to Silas, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. "We'll be okay." The pup whimpered and burrowed closer. His small body was warm, a point of heat in the suffocating cold. Una wrapped her arms around him and tried to ignore the sticky wetness of blood soaking through what remained of her tunic. Time lost meaning in the cells. Without light, without sun, Una couldn't tell if hours or days had passed. She slept in fits, jerking awake whenever the pain grew too sharp, or when Silas stirred. The fever came on the second day, or was it the third? Her wounds were infected. She knew that much. She could feel the heat radiating from her back, the way her skin pulled tight and angry. But she couldn't give up, not when Silas needed her. She discovered the water by accident, a section of wall where the dripping was heavier, pooling in a shallow depression in the stone. She cupped her hands beneath it, waiting with painful patience until she'd collected enough to drink. It tasted like rust and stone, but it kept them alive. Food was harder. For days, there was nothing. Una felt her body consuming itself, her strength draining away like water through cracks. Silas was suffering too, his small body growing lighter, his movements weaker. Then the rats came. Una heard them first, the scratch of claws on stone, the soft chittering in the darkness. Her stomach turned at the thought, but hunger was a vicious thing. It stripped away dignity, reduced everything to the brutal arithmetic of survival. She waited, barely breathing, until she felt one scurry close. Then she moved, fast despite the pain, and her hand closed around a furry body. The rat shrieked and bit her palm, but Una didn't let go. She couldn't afford to. She killed it quickly, more out of mercy than skill. Then she tore it apart in the darkness, feeling her way through fur and flesh. She fed Silas first, holding small pieces to his mouth until he ate. Only then did she force herself to swallow the rest. It kept them alive, barely. But something strange was happening. Una noticed it on what she thought was the 5th day. Silas wasn't moving like a blind animal anymore. When the rats came, he would turn his head toward them before they made any sound, before they even entered the cell. "How do you know they're coming?" Una whispered, running her fingers through his soft fur. Silas tilted his head, his milky eyes reflecting nothing in the absolute dark, but he seemed to be listening to something she couldn't hear, feeling something she couldn't feel. The bond between them deepened in that darkness. Una learned to interpret Silas's movements. The way his ears twitched meant water was dripping nearby. The way his body tensed meant rats were approaching. He became her eyes in the dark, and she became her protection against the world. One night, or day, she couldn't tell anymore, Una woke to find Silas standing rigid, his small body vibrating with tension. A low hum emanated from his throat, so quiet she almost missed it. "What is it?" Una asked. Silas pressed his nose against her chest, right over her heart, and suddenly, impossibly, Una saw something. Not with her eyes, those were useless in the dark, but in her mind she saw the cell, the dimensions of it, the curve of the walls, the places where the stone was weak and crumbling. She saw herself and Silas as shapes of heat, glowing warmth against cold stone. Then the vision was gone, leaving her gasping in the darkness. "What was that?" Una whispered. Silas made a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a hum, almost like he was trying to answer a question he didn't have words for. Una held him closer, her mind racing despite her fever. The blind pup wasn't as helpless as everyone thought. He wasn't cursed. He was something else entirely. 3 months in the weeping cells changed everything. Una's wounds had healed into thick, rope-like scars that pulled tight across her shoulders. Her body had adapted, leaner, harder, stripped down to nothing but survival. And Silas had grown. He was no longer a pup. His white fur had thickened, his legs had lengthened, and his jaw had developed the strong lines of a young wolf. But his eyes remained the same, milky white, seemingly sightless. Yet Una knew better now. She'd spent weeks watching him move through the pitch-black cell with impossible precision. He never stumbled, never hesitated. He moved like the darkness was his home, not his prison. The visions had continued. Not every day, but often enough that Una had learned to recognize the sensation, a warmth spreading from her chest, Silas's presence in her mind like a second heartbeat, and then sight without eyes. She'd learned that he wasn't seeing light or color or shapes the way she did. He was seeing something deeper, heat, movement, intention. He saw the world the way it truly was, not surfaces, but essences. Tonight, the visions came stronger than ever before. Una was sick again, her fever spiking from a fresh infection in one of her old wounds. She lay shivering on the stone floor, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they might crack. Silas pressed his entire body against hers, sharing his warmth. Then he placed his head over her heart. The vision exploded into her mind with enough force to make her gasp. She saw Ironspire, not from the cells, but from above. She saw the fortress laid out like a map, every wall and tower glowing with residual heat from the day's sun. She saw the guards on the battlements, their bodies bright spots of warmth against the cold stone. She saw people sleeping in their beds, their hearts beating in steady rhythms. And she saw Balthazar. The Alpha King was in his chambers, but something was wrong. His heartbeat, she could see it or feel it or sense it in some way she couldn't describe, was irregular, stuttering, weak, like a flame struggling against the wind. The vision expanded. She felt herself moving through the fortress, not with feet but with awareness. She could sense the ley lines beneath Ironspire, rivers of power flowing through the earth like veins carrying blood. And Silas was connected to them. He could feel every living thing that touched the ground, could sense the rhythm of their existence. This was the pulse, The world had a heartbeat, and Silas could hear it. Una's eyes snapped open, or had they been open all along? In the darkness, it didn't matter. Her fever was breaking, the chills subsiding. She could feel strength returning to her body, as if Silas had somehow pulled vitality from the earth itself and channeled it into her. "You're not broken," she whispered, running her hand over his head. "They called you cursed, but you're not. You're a seer." Silas let out a soft huff, his tail wagging slightly. It was the first time she'd heard him make a sound of contentment in 3 months. Una sat up slowly, her back protesting but holding. She looked at Silas, really looked, even though she couldn't see him in the dark. "He punished you for being blind, but blindness isn't your limitation, it's your gift. You don't see the lies on the surface, you see the truth underneath." Another vision flickered through her mind. This one was a memory, Silas's memory. She saw the day he was born, saw her mother's face, smelled the scent of blood and milk and fear, and she saw the figure standing in the shadows, Balthazar. He'd been there the day Silas was born. He'd looked at the blind pup with those cold amber eyes, and he knew. He'd known what Silas was, what he could become, and he was terrified. Because a seer wolf could see through lies, could sense the truth of a person's soul, could reveal secrets that were meant to stay buried. Balthazar hadn't called Silas cursed because he believed it. He'd called him cursed because he feared him. Una's hands clenched into fists. He knew, the bastard knew what you were from the beginning. A sound echoed through the darkness, distant but growing closer. Stone grinding against stone, voices shouting, the clash of metal on metal. Silas stood, his body going rigid. The low hum started in his throat again, but this time it was different, urgent, warning. Una rose to her feet, ignoring the pull of her scars. "What is it?" The vision came fast and chaotic. She saw warriors flooding through hidden passages beneath Ironspire, saw the stone walls of the fortress breached from below, saw blood and fire and betrayal. An invasion. Ironspire was under attack, and the weeping cells, the forgotten, forsaken cells where the cursed were left to rot, were directly in the path of the invading force. Silas turned toward the iron-grated door of their cell. His milky eyes stared at nothing and everything. Then he did something Una had never seen him do before. He opened his mouth and sang. It wasn't a howl, it wasn't a bark, it was a single, sustained note that vibrated through the stone, through the bones, through the very air itself. The sound built in intensity, climbing higher and higher, until Una felt it in her teeth, her skull, her chest. The iron grate shattered. No, not shattered, it simply fell apart, the metal separating at every joint and weld, as if the very bonds holding it together had decided to let go. Una stared at the open doorway, at freedom, at possibility. Then she looked down at Silas, at the seer wolf who wasn't supposed to exist. "All right then," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "Let's show them what cursed really means." Together, they stepped out of the darkness and into the chaos above. The weeks that followed were a study in transformation. Silas didn't just grow, he evolved. His white fur developed a luminescent quality, as if he'd absorbed moonlight in the darkness and now carried it beneath his skin. His body lengthened, muscles forming beneath the soft coat, paws growing large and steady. By the 6th week, he was nearly the size of a full-grown wolf, though Una knew he wasn't yet mature. But it was his awareness that changed most dramatically. Una learned to read the world through Silas's senses. When his ears twitched forward, she knew rats were approaching from the left corridor. When his body stiffened and his head tilted right, she understood that water was pooling 3 cells down, enough to drink. When he let out a low, almost subsonic hum, she felt the vibration in her chest and knew the guards were changing shifts 2 floors above. They developed a language without words, a rhythm. She would tap her fingers against the stone, 1 tap for hunger, 2 for thirst, 3 for danger. Silas would respond with movement, a nudge of his nose for agreement, a press of his paw for caution, a full body lean for urgency. The rats that had once been their prey began to avoid their cell entirely. Silas had learned to project something, fear perhaps, or simply the overwhelming presence of a predator, and the creatures scattered before they even reached the iron grate. Una didn't question it. She simply accepted that her cellmate was becoming something beyond her understanding. Her own body was healing in ways that defied logic. The infections that should have killed her had cleared. The scars on her back, which should have left her permanently damaged, had sealed into thick cords of tissue that pulled but didn't tear. She could move again, fight again if necessary. She practiced in the darkness, using the wall as her opponent. Punch, block, pivot. Her muscles remembered the training she'd received before her family fell from grace, before she became Omega. Silas would sit and watch, or sense, or whatever it was he did, and occasionally he'd make a soft sound that she interpreted as approval. Food became easier. Silas could sense the rats in the walls before they emerged, and Una learned to position herself perfectly for the catch. They ate better, survived better, grew stronger together. But there were moments when Silas would stop moving entirely, his body rigid as carved marble, and Una knew he was sensing something beyond their prison. His head would turn upward, toward the fortress above, and a low whine would escape his throat. "What do you see?" she would whisper, placing her hand on his back. Sometimes the visions would come to her then, brief, fragmented images of the world above. She saw Balthazar growing older, his movements slower, his eyes haunted. She saw the pack training in the courtyard, their formations sharper, more aggressive. She saw weapons being stockpiled, supplies being rationed. Ironspire was preparing for something. On what Una estimated was the 80th day, Silas began to sing. Not the sharp, focused note that had shattered the iron grate, but something else, a layered, harmonic sound that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. It started as a whisper and built slowly, resonating through the stone until Una felt it in her bones. The walls of their cell began to glow, not with light, but with heat signatures. Una could see the ley lines Silas was connected to, glowing veins of power that ran beneath Ironspire like roots beneath a tree. And she could see something else, a disturbance in the pattern, a corruption spreading through the lines, like poison through blood. Something was coming, something that would shatter the fragile peace above and drag everyone, even the forgotten Omega and her cursed wolf, into the fire. Silas stopped singing and looked at Una with his clouded eyes. In that moment, she understood. Their imprisonment was about to end, but not because they'd be freed, because the entire fortress was about to fall. Winter solstice arrived with ceremony and tradition. Above the weeping cells, Ironspire prepared for the trial of the Great Hunt, a sacred ritual where the pack's warriors would venture into the frozen wilderness to prove their worth. It was a night of celebration, of firelight and fermented honey wine, of stories told and bonds reaffirmed. It was also the perfect night for betrayal. Una felt the shift in the ley lines before she heard the first scream. Silas had been restless all day, pacing the cell with increasing agitation, his humming growing more urgent. Now he stood at the shattered grate, every muscle tensed, his clouded eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. "How many?" Una asked, though she already knew the answer would be bad. The vision hit her like a physical blow. She saw warriors, not Ironspire warriors, but others wearing the gray and white of the Frostmane pack, flooding through passages she'd never known existed, secret tunnels carved into the mountain centuries ago, sealed and forgotten by everyone except those who'd sold the knowledge for power. Commander Aldrich. The name came to her through Silas's perception, pulled from the conversations echoing through stone. Balthazar's most trusted guard, the man who'd sworn blood oaths to protect Ironspire, had opened the gates from within. The Frostmanes hadn't attacked the walls, they'd been invited into the heart. Una heard the clash of steel, the screams of surprise, the howls of wolves caught unprepared. The great hunt had left Ironspire's best warriors scattered across the wilderness. The fortress was defended by the young, the old, and the drunk. It was a massacre waiting to happen. "We have to move," Una said, already heading toward the cell door. Silas blocked her path. He pressed his head against her chest, and another vision flooded her mind. This one showing the passages between their cell and the Great Hall. She saw Frostmane soldiers moving through the tunnels, weapons drawn, murder in their eyes. Saw them passing within feet of where she and Silas hid. Going up meant walking straight into the invasion. But the vision shifted. Silas showed her another path, a collapsed section of tunnel 3 cells down, where the stone had weakened and water had eroded the mortar. Beyond it, a natural cave system that led up through the mountain, a path that would take longer but would emerge behind the invaders. "You brilliant, terrifying creature," Una whispered, running her hand through his fur. They moved fast through the darkness. Una had learned to navigate by sound and touch, and Silas guided her with nudges and pressure. They reached the collapsed section, and Una began pulling at the loose stones, ignoring the pain in her hands as rocks scraped skin. Silas added his own efforts, his powerful jaws gripping larger stones and hauling them aside. Within minutes, they'd created an opening large enough to squeeze through. The natural caves beyond were tight and treacherous. Una had to crawl in places, her scarred back scraping against low ceilings, her breath coming hard in the confined space. But Silas never wavered. He moved with absolute certainty, and Una followed. They climbed for what felt like hours. The sounds of battle grew louder, steel on steel, screams of pain and rage, the deep howls of wolves locked in combat. Una's heart hammered against her ribs. 3 months ago, she'd been content to die in the weeping cells. Now, climbing toward a battle she had no stake in, she felt more alive than she had in years. The tunnel opened into a narrow fissure behind the Great Hall's western wall. Through the crack, Una could see chaos. Frostmane warriors had pushed into the hall, driving Ironspire's defenders back. Bodies littered the stone floor. Both packs had paid in blood. At the center of it all stood Balthazar, his great sword swinging in wide arcs, holding back 3 attackers at once. But he was tiring, slowing. And behind him, moving with predatory grace, was Commander Aldrich. The traitor's blade was drawn, its edge glinting in the firelight. He was positioning himself for the killing blow, waiting for the moment when Balthazar's attention was fully focused on the enemies in front of him. Una looked at Silas. The white wolf looked back, his milky eyes somehow conveying a question. They could walk away, escape through the caves, disappear into the wilderness, leave Ironspire to its fate. After everything Balthazar had done to them, no one could blame them. But Una remembered the young warrior Davin, who'd looked away because he couldn't bear to watch her suffer. She remembered old Marin, whose eyes carried understanding and sorrow. She remembered the children who'd peeked through windows at Silas, curious rather than cruel. Ironspire wasn't just Balthazar, it was people, and people deserved a chance to be better than their worst leader. "All right," Una said, placing her hand on Silas's head. "Let's go save a king who doesn't deserve it." Silas moved first. He didn't burst through the fissure. He sang. The same harmonic note he'd used to shatter the cell door, but focused now, refined. The stone wall didn't explode, it simply ceased to exist, the molecules losing cohesion as Silas found the frequency that bound them and stopped it. The wall dissolved into powder and dust, creating an opening large enough for them to step through. The great hall fell silent. Every warrior, Ironspire and Frostmane alike, stopped mid-swing and stared at the impossible sight. A woman covered in scars, her eyes burning with purpose, standing beside a white wolf whose clouded eyes should have been blind, but somehow seemed to see everything. "The Omega," someone whispered. "The Cursed One," another voice added, awed and terrified in equal measure. Commander Aldrich recovered first. He'd been 3 steps from driving his blade between Balthazar's shoulders. Now he pivoted, his scarred face twisting into a sneer. The dead have returned. How poetic. He raised his sword toward Una. Kill them both. 5 Frostmane warriors broke from the battle and charged. Silas didn't move. He simply tilted his head and hummed. The warriors stopped as if they'd hit an invisible wall. Their eyes went wide, pupils dilating until the irises disappeared. They clutched at their faces, at their eyes, making sounds of animal panic. Because suddenly, they couldn't see. Silas had projected his blindness onto them, shared the darkness he lived in every moment of every day. But while he'd spent his entire life learning to navigate without sight, these warriors had no such training. They stumbled, disoriented, weapons falling from nerveless fingers. "Voidbringer," Old Marin breathed from where she crouched behind an overturned table, but there was no fear in her voice, only wonder. The battle resumed, but now the momentum had shifted. Ironspire's defenders, emboldened by the impossible sight, pressed forward with renewed fury. The Frostmanes, unnerved by magic they didn't understand, began to falter. Aldrich snarled and moved toward Balthazar again, determined to complete his betrayal. But Una was faster. She didn't have a weapon, but 3 months of surviving on rats and rage had honed her into something sharp and dangerous. She caught Aldrich's sword arm mid-swing, using his own momentum to throw him off balance. They went down together, rolling across the blood-slicked floor. "You should have stayed buried," Aldrich growled, his free hand going for the knife at his belt. "You should have stayed loyal," Una shot back, slamming her elbow into his throat. They fought with the brutal efficiency of people who had nothing left to lose. Aldrich was stronger, better trained, armed, but Una had spent 3 months learning to survive in absolute darkness, learning to read intent through the smallest shifts in sound and movement. She felt his muscles tense a split second before he moved, felt the change in his breathing before he struck, and she moved with him, staying 1 heartbeat ahead, turning his strength against him. Silas, meanwhile, had become the center of chaos. Warriors from both packs gave him a wide berth, terrified and awed by the white wolf who could steal sight with a thought. He moved through the hall like a ghost, his humming rising and falling, each note targeting an enemy. A Frostmane warrior swung an axe at him, the weapon shattered mid-arc, fragments of metal falling harmlessly to the floor. Silas had found the frequency of steel and broken it. Another attacker charged with a spear. The wooden shaft disintegrated in his hands, reduced to splinters and dust. Balthazar, given space to breathe, watched the white wolf with something approaching religious terror. This was the creature he'd called Cursed, the pup he'd ordered thrown into a pit, and it was saving his kingdom. Una and Aldrich's fight ended with brutal simplicity. The commander made a desperate lunge with the knife. Una caught his wrist, twisted hard, and felt bone snap. Aldrich screamed. The knife fell, and Una, acting on instinct born from 3 months in the dark, grabbed the blade and drove it home. Aldrich's eyes went wide. He looked down at the knife buried in his chest, then up at Una. "How?" he gasped. "You're just an Omega." "No," Una said, her voice cold as winter stone. "I'm the one who survived what you couldn't imagine." She let him fall. The remaining Frostmane warriors, seeing their invasion collapsing and their commander dead, broke and ran. Ironspire's defenders chased them into the tunnels, howling victory. The great hall fell into an exhausted silence, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of dying fires. Balthazar, bleeding from a dozen wounds but still standing, approached Una. His great sword hung loose in his hand. His eyes, those cold amber eyes that had watched her beaten without mercy, now carried something she'd never seen in them before: shame. "Una," he began, his voice hoarse. Silas stepped between them. The white wolf, who had just saved the entire fortress, now stood as a barrier between Una and the king. His clouded eyes stared at nothing and everything. A low, warning rumble built in his chest. The message was clear. This man hurt her. Come no closer. Balthazar stopped. He looked at the wolf, at the Omega with scars he'd carved into her skin, at the impossible thing they'd become together in the dark, and for the second time in his long reign, Balthazar Grimm knelt. Not in threat, not in mockery, in acknowledgement. The pack, watching from the shadows and corners, saw their king bow to the Omega and the cursed wolf, and they understood that everything had changed. Una looked down at Balthazar, at this man who embodied everything wrong with Ironspire. She should hate him. Part of her did. But hate was exhausting, and she'd spent 3 months learning that survival required something stronger than rage. "Get up," she said quietly. "Your people need you. We're not done yet." Because through Silas's senses, she could feel it. The Frostmanes were retreating, but they weren't defeated. They'd regroup, return, and next time they'd come prepared for magic. The real battle hadn't ended. It had only just begun. The Frostmanes returned 3 days later, and this time they came with numbers. 200 warriors materialized from the frozen wilderness like ghosts, their gray and white war paint making them nearly invisible against the snow. They surrounded Ironspire, cutting off all escape routes, preparing for a siege that would starve the fortress into submission. But they hadn't counted on the seer wolf. Una stood on the battlements beside Balthazar, watching the enemy forces position themselves. The king's advisors argued tactics, how long their food would last, whether they should attempt a breakout, how many warriors they could spare for a desperate charge. Una ignored them all. She placed her hand on Silas's head and closed her eyes. The vision came instantly now, their connection strong enough that she barely had to ask. She saw the Frostmane forces through Silas's perception, not as individuals, but as a network of heartbeats, a web of intention and fear. She could feel their confidence, their certainty that numbers would win the day. They were wrong. "Open the gates," Una said quietly. The advisors fell silent. Balthazar turned to her, his scarred face twisted in confusion. "That's suicide." "No," Una said, meeting his eyes. "That's faith." She didn't wait for permission. She walked down from the battlements, Silas padding silently beside her. The fortress gates groaned as they opened, and Una stepped out into the snow alone. The Frostmane army watched her approach with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. A single Omega woman and a white wolf walking calmly toward 200 armed warriors. It was either madness or a trap. Their commander, a massive man named Ragnar Iceblood, stepped forward. "Where is your Alpha? Has Balthazar sent his servants to beg for mercy?" "Balthazar sent no one," Una replied, her voice carrying across the snow. I came because you're standing on sacred ground, and I'm giving you one chance to leave." Ragnar laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Sacred ground? This is conquered territory, woman. By sunset, Ironspire will fly Frostmane colors, and you'll be—" Silas sang. The note started low, so deep it was felt more than heard. It vibrated through the snow, through the boots of the warriors, through their bones. Then it rose, climbing higher until it became something that existed between sound and sensation. The world went dark. Not the darkness of night or closed eyes. This was absolute, a void so complete that it swallowed not just light, but the memory of light. 200 Frostmane warriors suddenly found themselves blind, their confident formation dissolving into chaos. They screamed, they stumbled, they swung weapons at phantoms and struck their own brothers. But Una could see. Through Silas's eyes, or whatever it was that let him perceive the world, she saw every warrior as a shape of heat and intention. She moved through the darkness like water, like wind, like inevitability. She'd taken a sword from Ironspire's armory, a simple blade that felt right in her hand. She didn't fight like a warrior, she fought like someone who'd survived the impossible. The first man she reached was swinging his axe blindly, terror making him dangerous. Una slid past his guard and struck once, precise and clean. He fell without seeing what killed him. The second and third went down just as quickly. Una moved through the supernatural darkness, guided by Silas's perception, and the Frostmanes had no defense against an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't predict. Behind her, Ironspire's gates opened wider. Warriors poured out, and though they too were blind in Silas's darkness, Una had taught them the signs, the rhythm. They moved in formation, trusting sound and touch, while their enemies flailed in terror. It wasn't a battle, it was a harvest. Ragnar Iceblood died trying to retreat, cut down by warriors he couldn't see. His lieutenants fell beside him. And as the Frostmane forces broke and ran, Silas released his hold on the darkness. Light returned to the world like a physical blow. The snow was red, bodies lay scattered across the field, and standing at the center of it all was Una Valerius, the Omega who wasn't supposed to matter, covered in blood that wasn't hers, a white wolf at her side whose clouded eyes had just rewritten the rules of warfare. The surviving Frostmanes didn't stop running until they'd crossed back into their own territory. They spread the word. Ironspire was protected by a witch and a demon wolf. Any who attacked would face the void itself. Ironspire was saved, not by its king, not by its warriors, but by the cursed ones who refused to die in the dark. The victory feast lasted 3 days, but Una attended none of it. She stayed in the room they'd given her, a proper chamber with a bed and a hearth, and tried to remember what it felt like to be warm and safe. Silas lay beside the fire, his white fur glowing in the firelight, and together they existed in a silence that felt earned. On the 4th day, Balthazar came to her door. He didn't knock, he simply entered, his presence filling the room like smoke. He looked different than he had during the battle, cleaner, rested, but somehow diminished. The victory should have made him stronger. Instead, he seemed hollowed out. "Una," he began, and she noticed he used her name now, not her rank. "We need to talk." "About what?" Una didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Silas, on the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "About the future." Balthazar moved closer, his boots heavy on the stone floor. "About what comes next for you and him. His name is Silas." "Silas," Balthazar repeated, the name foreign in his mouth. "What he did out there, what you both did, it changes everything. The pack sees it, I see it." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a calculated warmth. "I was wrong about you, about him. I see that now. Una finally looked at him. You see that now, after 3 months of torture, after trying to kill us, after we saved your kingdom, now you see? Balthazar had the grace to look ashamed, but there was something else beneath it, something hungry. I was operating under old laws, old fears, but laws can change, fear can be overcome. He stepped closer still. Una, I want to make this right. I want to give you back everything that was taken from you. You can't give back what you destroyed. No, Balthazar admitted, but I can offer you something new, something better. He gestured broadly, as if encompassing the entire fortress. You've proven yourself stronger than any warrior, wiser than any advisor. With Silas at your side, you're the most powerful asset Ironspire has ever possessed. Asset. The word hung in the air like rot. I'm offering you a position on my council, not as Omega, as my equal. You'll have authority, resources, respect, everything you've been denied. And together, with Silas's abilities, we can expand Ironspire's territory. We can conquer the southern kingdoms. We can build an empire that will last 1,000 years. Una stood slowly. Silas raised his head, his clouded eyes fixed on the king. You want to use him, use us, just like you wanted to destroy us when it suited you. I want to honor you, Balthazar said, but there was desperation creeping into his voice now. I'm offering you a crown, Una. I'm offering to make you my queen. The word should have meant something. Once, perhaps, it would have. But Una had spent 3 months in darkness, learning what truly mattered, and crowns weren't on that list. Why? She asked quietly. Why this sudden generosity? Balthazar opened his mouth to answer, but Silas made a sound, a low, warning hum that vibrated through the room. And suddenly, Una felt it, the pull of vision, stronger than it had ever been before. She didn't try to resist. The memory flooded her mind with the force of a dam breaking. She saw a birthing room, warm and close. She saw a woman, young, beautiful, with Una's eyes, screaming as she brought new life into the world. She saw the midwife placing a small white pup onto the bed, saw the mother's face fill with love despite the pup's clouded, sightless eyes. And she saw Balthazar. He stood in the doorway, watching. The woman, Una's sister, Elena, looked up at him with desperate hope. He's healthy, annoyed, she said, her voice trembling. Strong. Please, my lord, please don't take him from me. Balthazar had moved closer, examining the pup with cold assessment. He's blind, a defect. He's my son, Elena had pleaded. He's your nephew, your blood. Una felt the truth hit her like a physical blow. Elena had been married to Balthazar's younger brother, making her family, making Silas pack. The law of the flawless fang is absolute. Weakness cannot be tolerated, even in family, especially in family. Elena had clutched Silas to her chest. Then I refuse. I won't give him up. And Balthazar had drawn his blade. The vision showed Una things she wished she could unsee, showed her Elena fighting with desperate strength, trying to protect her newborn son, showed her losing, showed her blood spreading across the birthing bed, while Silas, blind and helpless, whimpered beside her cooling body. But Elena had managed one final act. She'd wrapped Silas in cloth and thrown him through the window into the snow below, gambling that someone, anyone, would find him before the cold did. Una had found him, had taken him in, had loved him without knowing he was her nephew, her blood, and Balthazar had tried to kill them both to hide the truth. The vision released her. Una staggered, catching herself against the wall. Silas was on his feet now, his lips pulled back in a silent snarl. Through their connection, Una felt his rage, not the hot, explosive anger of youth, but the cold, eternal fury of someone who'd finally understood the full scope of the injustice done to him. You killed my sister, Una said, her voice dead calm. You murdered Elena because she refused to throw her son into a pit. Balthazar's face went white. That's not, I did what was necessary.
You called him cursed to cover up your crime. You branded an infant a Voidbringer because he could have exposed that you murdered your own family, that you violated every law of pack and blood. She defied me, Balthazar roared, the mask finally cracking. She chose a defective pup over her king, over tradition. She chose love over cruelty, Una said, and you couldn't stand that someone would choose differently than you. Balthazar's hand went to the wormtail at his belt, the whip that had carved rivers into Una's back. You can't prove any of this. It's been months. The pack will never believe a seer wolf's visions over their king. Won't they? Una asked. After you just tried to bribe me into being your weapon, after you offered me a crown, not out of justice, but out of greed for power? She saw it then, the moment Balthazar realized he had revealed too much, the moment he understood that his attempt at manipulation had instead exposed the truth of his character. His hand tightened on the whip. Then I suppose we're at an impasse. No, Una said, we're at an ending.
Balthazar drew the wormtail with the practiced ease of someone who'd wielded it for 30 years. The silver-threaded leather uncoiled like a snake, the same weapon that had turned Una's back into a map of scars. "I offered you everything," he said, circling her slowly. "I was willing to forgive, to forget, but you're just like your sister, too stubborn to see reason." "Elena saw perfectly clearly," Una replied. She didn't move, didn't reach for a weapon. She simply stood, Silas at her side. "She saw you for what you are, a man so terrified of his own weakness that he destroys anything that reflects it back at him." The whip cracked. Balthazar wasn't aiming to wound anymore. He was aiming to kill. But the leather never reached Una. It stopped midair, frozen as if caught in ice. Silas had found the whip's frequency, the rhythm of its braided threads, and he'd stopped it. Balthazar pulled, but the wormtail wouldn't move. It hung suspended, defying gravity and logic. Sweat broke out on the king's forehead. "What?" Silas sang, a single pure note. The whip didn't just fall, it came alive. The silver threads unraveled and rebraided themselves, moving with serpentine grace. Balthazar tried to drop it, but the leather had already wrapped around his wrist, crawling up his arm like a living thing. "No!" Balthazar gasped, pulling frantically, but the wormtail had been designed to burn, to cut, and now it served a new master. The silver threads coiled around his neck, tightening with each desperate attempt to free himself. Una watched without interfering. She'd learned in the darkness that some justice had to be poetic to be true. Balthazar fell to his knees, his face turning purple. His eyes, those cold amber eyes that had watched her suffer, now pleaded for the mercy he'd never shown. The whip continued to constrict, and Una felt no satisfaction, no joy, just the cold recognition that this was what happened when cruelty turned on itself. The door burst open. Balthazar's guards rushed in, weapons drawn, but they stopped short, seeing their king strangling on his own weapon, while the Omega and the White Wolf stood watching. "Help me!" Balthazar rasped, one hand extended toward them. The guards looked at Una, at Silas, at the king who'd ruled through fear and tradition, and they did nothing. Old Marin appeared in the doorway, her ancient eyes taking in the scene. She nodded once, as if confirming something she'd always suspected. "The pack has a right to know," she said quietly. "Tell them, Omega. Tell them what he did." So Una did. She told them about Elena, about the murder disguised as law, about the false curse invented to hide fratricide. And as she spoke, Silas projected his memories, visions flooding into the minds of everyone present. They saw what Una had seen, felt what Silas had felt. They saw the truth. The wormtail released Balthazar suddenly, dropping him to the floor. He gasped for air, clutching his bruised throat, but the damage was done. His guards looked at him with disgust. Marin's face showed only weary confirmation. "The law of the flawless fang," Una said, her voice carrying through the room, "demands that weakness be purged, that those who threaten the pack be cast out." She looked down at Balthazar. "You are the rot you pretended to fight." Balthazar tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't hold him. "I am your king," he wheezed. "You can't—" "You were a king," Marin corrected. "Now you're just a murderer." The former Alpha King died 3 days later, not from his wounds, but from the weight of his own shame. They found him in his chambers, the wormtail coiled beside him like a sleeping snake. Some said his heart simply gave out. Others whispered that Silas had stopped it from a distance, a final mercy for a man who'd shown none. Una never claimed the throne. She had no interest in ruling through dominance or fear. Instead, she became what Ironspire had never had before: a keeper, someone who protected rather than commanded, someone who listened rather than dictated. Silas became the pack's seer, his clouded eyes seeing truths that saved lives. When disputes arose, he would show people the hearts of those involved, would reveal intentions and hidden pain. Justice became something felt rather than enforced. The changes came slowly. The law of the flawless fang was rewritten. Strength became defined not by the absence of flaws, but by the courage to protect those who had them. Omegas were elevated, the disabled were accommodated. Children born with differences were celebrated for their unique perspectives. Ironspire transformed from a fortress of fear into a sanctuary of acceptance. But Una never forgot the lessons learned in the weeping cells. She kept her scars visible, wore them like armor. They reminded everyone, including herself, that survival wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about refusing to break what mattered while you healed. Years later, when young wolves asked how she defeated a king and changed a kingdom, Una would sit beside Silas and tell them the truth. "I didn't win through strength. I won through silence, through refusing to let cruelty make me cruel, through protecting what everyone else called broken until it had time to reveal its true power." She'd run her hand over Silas's white fur, and the seer wolf would hum contentedly. True strength isn't found in perfection. It's found in the spaces between, in the cracks where light gets in the scars that prove you survived, in the quiet choice to keep loving even when the world demands you hate. And then she'd smile, that same quiet smile she'd worn in the courtyard 3 months into her beating, and she'd say the words that became Ironspire's new creed. Compassion is rebellion, kindness is defiance, and love is the most powerful weapon ever forged. Before you go, ask yourself, have you ever been the one who needed protection or the one who offered it? Have you ever been called too soft for caring when the world demanded hardness? Drop a W if you believe the greatest strength is in refusing to abandon those the world has written off. We're building a pack here, a community that believes compassion isn't weakness, it's warfare against a system that profits from cruelty. If this story resonated with you, if you felt Una's silence or recognized Silas's hidden power, then you're already part of something bigger. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and remember, the world calls it mercy to let the broken die quickly. We call it cowardice. Real strength is carrying what others won't. Real power is protecting what others abandon. Real victory is changing the system that created the suffering in the first place. Stay fierce, stay kind, and never let them convince you that caring is weakness. It's the only thing that's ever changed the world.